I know I've called it kind of a dead genre, but I've got to admit, this was a pretty fire year for thrash metal.
He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is.
I'm not. I'm getting better.
No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment.
So we're going to rank many of the big thrash releases from 2022, starting with Destruction and Diabolical. So right from the top, this album really surprised me. I went in expecting a very mid, run-of-the-mill thrash metal album from a pretty tired old band, but what I got was a total rager, and I could have only anticipated this kind of release from a band in their 20s, really, is what it feels like, the level of vitality on display here. This may have to do in part with new guitarist Damir Eskik of Gomorrah, who just really brings it on every song. The riffage on this thing, the hooks, man. Total banger, putting this one A tier.
Just hook it to my veins!
But with the good, we also got to talk about the bad. So on the flip side, we have Tankard with Pavlov's Dogs, which is frankly just terrible. just downright awful. I think in particular, what really made it a hard listen for me is the cringe as hell boomer lyrics and just terrible delivery too, especially on tracks like X-Influencer.
Then she ran, being a victim of Instagram.
How embarrassing.
And unfortunately, the instrumentation doesn't save it either. Like, I can appreciate an album that's kind of cringe, kind of lame in the lyrical department. There are plenty of them, as long as the music is good. Here, it's just fine. Like, it's still pretty average, so it's not good. Would not recommend. Putting this one a D tier. Terrible album cover, too. But we can fortunately cleanse that from our ears with the incredible Voivod, Synchro Anarchy. Really more of a progressive metal album than a thrash album, but it's always fun to see in what form these guys will come in. Honestly, I think it's in their top 3 albums, and there's a reason why it made my top 10 of the entire year. Overall, incredible musicianship with a lot of weird technical songwriting. Just a blast. Really blown away by this album. It's going to S tier. All right, let's talk about Kreator with Full HD. Really solid crossover album with headbanging beats, great grooves, killer bass, and fist-pumping gang vocals. I'm a sucker for that punk and hardcore energy, and there's plenty of that on display here, not to mention a really great sense of humor, too, in the music videos. It's just that extra icing on the cake that really wins me over. Really fun stuff. I'm going to put this one at B tier. Not my favorite crossover album of the year, though, because that is going to go to Municipal Waste with Electrified Brain.
Pizza time.
What a fun record. Like, just a blast. Good time. Pizza thrash, as people in the Discord have been calling it. I love me some party time crossover thrash, and this delivered on that promise, and then some. I was blasting this one in the car pretty much the entire month it came out with a big smile on my face, and it easily made it onto my favorites list too. Just non-stop rager after rager. Another one going to A tier. Alright, I asked y'all which albums I should include, and there were some I wasn't as familiar with, and included in that was Sentrix with 7 words. Really solid riffing on this one, but I do feel like the vocals don't get to me the way that they should. Like, it just feels kind of like almost Kreator light was the phrase that kept popping in my head. Good, but just very middle of the road. It just wasn't having that extra, like, thrash should like really get under my skin and make me want to like punch the wall or something. And I just don't get enough of that from here. Credit where it's due again for some of the awesome guitar work, but as a whole package, it's just kind of lacking for me. So gonna put it at C. Remember, C just means average. It's good. It's not bad. It's not great. It just is.
It was not what I wanted!
Back to another bigger band here. We have Venom Inc. with There's Only Black. This was a really disappointing, frustrating album for me. I hated the really yowly vocal approach on a lot of this, and also the riffs, again, just very, very generic. The vocals are just bad, I think, and then the riffs don't make up for it. Like, at least Sentrix had those great riffs, but here they're just kind of whatever. They're not terrible, but there's nothing to them. I ended up just sort of struggling my way through this thing, and then I forgot about it pretty much immediately. It took me a couple tries to even get all the way through. Like, I think it's honestly worse than Tankard, because at least Tankard kind of made me laugh. there was something to engage with here. This was just like a slog. It's just nothing. So yeah, D tier for that one.
You blew it!
As always, if you disagree, let me know down in the comments. I am by no means the end-all be-all of opinions, and if you're enjoying the video, hit the like button too, or if you hate it, hit the dislike button. It doesn't fucking matter to me. Alright, but let's go on to Toxic with Dismorta. Holy fuck, some of the guitar work on this album is just absolutely face-melting. Fantastic stuff. And I'm not always into the falsetto vocal approach too, but it comes together really well here. Like, just really righteous stuff again with that old school flair to it. Very much feels like it's recorded even kind of back in the 80s and 90s, which is true of a couple of the albums on this list, but I think particularly this one. I frequently say I'm tired of most bands sort of recycling old formulas, but when they manage to do it better than anyone else, I have to give credit where it's due. So this one shot straight up to S tier. Really glad people put it on my radar. I'm going to need to dig into their discography a lot more too.
It got wild.
Then we also got a new Megadeth with The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead. Another album I had pretty much no expectations about, but when they started dropping the singles, I kind of got hyped for it. Like, there's some really good tracks on here, and except for the shoehorned in Ice-T section, and no problem with Ice-T or rap overall, I just felt like it didn't fit in the song, but otherwise Night Stalkers is one of my favorite songs in the thrash metal genre of the year.
They seize the night when it's dark like inside a tomb. They leave their flat black body armor gleams.
Dave really killing it with the riffs. One of the better modern Megadeth albums by far. Like, I'd put it like maybe in the top 5 at least. That might be controversial. I don't know. It's up there.
Surprise, motherfucker.
It's got some lower moments, but I was genuinely surprised with how much I enjoyed it. So I'm putting it at B tier. I'll be interested to see how the audience responds to this one, because I know a lot of people liked Midnight with Let There Be Witchery.
Cast a spell upon the dead. Cast a spell against what?
I think these guys are fun, but ultimately just okay. Like, I don't fully understand the hype around them. I've heard that you got to see them live to like fully get into it, and based on some of the stories I've heard, I could see that. They seem like they'd be a really fun live band, but I've just never really fully gotten into their albums, and same here. I just find it to be hit and miss, and despite multiple listens, I just couldn't fully get into it, even though on paper it seems like it should be right up my alley, because I love black and thrash and just kind of like the rebellious vibes and the imagery. I'm always down for that, but it just, I don't know, this one didn't grip me, so it's going to C tier.
Right to jail, right away.
Then we have Gwar coming with the new Dark Ages. Wearing the shirt, my brother-in-law got it for me at, I think it was Riot Fest. As silly as Gwar can be in premise, I gotta say, the music on this album is anything but a joke. Like, some amazing head bobbers like Blood Libel and Berserker Mode. And then also one of the more solid vocal performances on this list too. I've never been like a deeply profound Gwar fan, so sitting down and kind of like going back to it, it had been a while since I'd really listened to any Gwar. And I was genuinely impressed. Like, there's a very classic vibe to it. It's almost Dio-esque at times. I don't know if that's controversial to say. And then others, it's more like Ministry, like on Motherfucking Liar. So some diversity, good songwriting. Putting this one at B tier. Then there's Annihilator with Metal 2. Now, I'm not a big fan of re-recordings to begin with, but it doesn't help that this album was already very poorly received with just how corny it gets with tracks like Couple Suicide and the like 20 years too late Van Halen energy of Romeo Delight.
How fucking lame.
Yeah, that's so embarrassing.
Ugh.
We were just talking on the Discord about how metal bands should never go full butt rock, and this is the perfect example, I think, of why I can't imagine then deciding to actually do it a second time. And that title is like the ultimate irony to me, so this one's going also to D tier. Now, alternatively, there are examples of solid re-recordings, and I think that Sodom's 40 Years at War is definitely one of them. Not only do these tracks sound great, it's not your traditional straight remake either. Instead, they set out to do one song from each of their previous albums, in many cases opting for ones that have rarely been performed live. As a result, it's really cool to hear the development of their songwriting over the years, but also in a way that showcases just how good they still sound today. At 17 tracks, it's a little uneven, but good stuff nonetheless, putting this one at B tier. A little bit of a underground pick here, kinda sorta. We got Sadistic Ritual with the Enigma Boundless. Self-described psychedelic thrash metal once more. Those progressive leanings make for a very interesting listen, and I also dig the more blackened thrash leanings of Murmur and Maelstrom of Consciousness, reminding me quite a bit of Watain. Area Denial is my personal favorite, with its relentless pace, ripping solos, and punishing bass tone, but then you've also got the surprising full instrumental The Blood of Memory. Really cool listen, definitely a standout on this list. I'm putting it at S tier. Saw a couple people recommending Razor with Cycle of Contempt.
Distant eyes watching us for centuries since our birth. Those who are responsible for putting us on earth.
Just a fun headbanger of a record, not particularly remarkable, but I love the riffage and the overall speed. Like, this thing is fast, and it also, again, has a certain grittiness to it that makes it feel more in that 80s, 90s kind of zone. Not in love with it, but really solid. Gonna put this one at C tier. Then a new EP from Vio-lence with Let the World Burn. More fucking rager riffs on this one, with some of the fastest hooks on this list overall, and more raunchy bass tone. I also appreciate that since it's just an EP, the 24-minute runtime really works in its favor as far as the genre goes, and actually leaves me wanting more instead of overstaying its welcome. The only issue I have is that the vocals can be a little bit hit and miss, but they've always had a certain charm to them in their inconsistencies. So I think another one going to B tier.
That's some heavy shit, man.
Next up is Witchery with Nightside. Yay, more blackened thrash, and this is more like it for me. I think also another concise release at just 35 minutes. Definitely approve of that. Less is more when it comes to thrash, y'all. Just embrace the brevity. Funny thing is that this is a slower paced album than that Midnight album, but it gets me moving way more, and A Forest of Burning Coffins is a barn burner. I dig the atmosphere and variety and the textures of each song. Very menacing, cool guitar harmonies, and I love the retro cover art. This one's going to A tier. Next up is Traitor with Exiled to the Surface. Another release with promise, but feels like it's missing something. The riffs are well performed, but lack some personality. The vocals don't really do much for me. It's like a solid foundation, but then they just built a really cookie-cutter house on top of it. Maybe it's just me. It's good, just not very memorable, although that cover of George Michael's Careless Whisper is an interesting surprise.
I'm never gonna dance again. Guilty feet have got no rhythm. So it's easy to pretend. I know you're not a fool.
C tier. One of the kind of newer albums on this list, Blood Clot with Souls. This album feels like an interesting mix of Slayer and Exodus, with vocals more in line with the former and the instrumentation maybe closer to the latter. As such, it's super heavy and full of energy, and at just 7 tracks, mostly just around 3 minutes, it gets in and does its thing and gets out. I will say that the first half is a lot better than the second, though, as it starts making some decisions with the style and songwriting I didn't care for much. As it stands, it starts off as a B, but it kind of got pulled down to more of a C+ by the end. So I'm going to put it kind of on the upper end of C tier. Another big release here, Kreator with Hate Über Alles. I saw a lot of people had really mixed opinions on this album, but for me, I think Kreator consistently gets credit from me for having one of the more interesting discographies with all the different eras of their sound, and that trend continues here. I'll say, too, that even when Kreator is bad, quote-unquote, it's always interesting, which is not something I can say about all the other thrash bands out there. In any case, this feels like a solid progression from the last 2 releases, mixing thrash, groove, and even some Megadeth, as well as a curveball in Midnight Sun with guest vocals from Sophia Portney. Not perfect, but definitely an album I listened to quite a few times and still enjoy revisiting. The only track I don't like is Strongest of the Strong, which I find super corny, but Other than that, it's A tier for me.
Hey, if you don't like it, you can get it.
Winding things down, we've got Aggression with From Hell with Hate. Didn't really care much for this album. It feels very haphazard to me, which can be endearing in some cases, but here it just feels messy, especially on the awful Crows of Still Creek. It has some moments like the very punky D-beat of the Night Stalker, that's a fun one, but even these parts are pretty paint by numbers, so more of like a C-, but it winds up in D on this list. And then we have Vorbid with A Swan by the Edge of Mandala. Now, I recall seeing a few people talking about this album, and it intrigued me on sampling to add it to my maybe list, but I just never got around to it until now. And I'm really glad that this list gave me an excuse to finally give it a full listen, because this is pretty rad stuff. Prog thrash is another union I'm particularly fond of, with this having some similar vibes to stuff like Vector mixed with a little Opeth in some of the guitar work. From a songwriting and performance standpoint, it's leaps and bounds above most of the competition here, to the point that it's kind of unfair. I'd put this one in kind of second place, I think, at S tier. Y'all check out this video for our community ranking of a lot of big thrash metal bands. Got kind of controversial, kind of fun. And then, of course, again, let me know down in the comments how you might rank these albums differently. But you can also check out this playlist of my other favorite metal albums of the year by different genres. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.